I'm really excited to kick off this Love Thy Neighbor series. My name is Haiti Aguiar. I'm the founding principal of Fundamental Roots. And as someone who had a very international upbringing, as you can tell, my accent changes all the time. You cannot place it. That's because I had a very international upbringing, and I grew up where I had to constantly adapt and adjust and interact with many different nationalities and ethnicities. And so I'm a very strong believer that we can only learn about someone's culture if we are genuine and are willing to ask questions. Also, and so I'm a very important, you cannot tell someone's culture by their race. I think this is a big area where a lot of people mix those two terms, race and culture. They're two different terms. You cannot tell someone's culture if you observe what their race is. And also, I believe what we don't know and we don't understand, there's a high chance we'll start fearing it. And then that's when other problems creep in, such as biases, assumptions, prejudices, etc. And so it's very important to understand that culture is about our values, our beliefs, our practices that we have for ourselves. And it very much is intertwined and influences our communication, our interactions, and our decision making. So it's really important to understand someone else's culture so you understand where they're coming from. So there is such a thing as national culture or ethnicity culture. That's a shared culture that you grow up with and learn. But then we all have our own family culture, and we all have our own personal culture that develops with our life experiences and the people that we meet. So we all have culture. It doesn't matter what your ethnic background is. Everybody has culture. And the only way we're going to find out is by asking questions. And I just love to learn about different people's cultures because it's just amazing to be enriched, and learn all of these different perspectives and practices that are important to people. And so I'm really excited that we can kick off this series with the African American ethnicity. And so I wanted to ask our panelists who very kindly made time to join us today on a Saturday morning to introduce themselves. So Angelique, I'll put you on the spot. Have you kick us off?
Thank you, Haiti, and thank you for having me. My name is Angelique Brown. I live in Pasadena, California. I am a key account manager for the American Heart Association under the Emergency Care Division, and I'm happy to be here.
Yay. Shante?
Hi, everyone. I'm Shante Wells. I'm currently here in Houston, Texas. I'm the Director of Donation Systems for Life Gift here in Texas, and thank you for inviting me, Haiti.
Thank you for coming. Horatio, do you want to go next?
Yes, I'm Horatio Keys. I'm in Jackson, Mississippi. I worked in a hospital setting for about 15 years, with most of those years being in critical care. Currently, I work with Mississippi Organ Recovery Agency as the manager of hospital development. And I'm just excited to be here, and I'm honored that you asked.
Awesome. Thank you, Horatio. And Horatio was recently promoted. Congratulations.
Yes.
And Justin, how about you?
Hello, good morning, everybody. I'm Justin Johnson. I'm the Director of Clinical Services with the New Jersey Sharing Network. I'm calling you today from Stewartsville, New Jersey, is where I live currently. Today, I'm in Syracuse, New York, visiting my son that attends school here. I've been an organ and tissue donation for the past 13 years and been a nurse for the past 19 years. So thank you, Haiti, for having me, and look forward to a good discussion.
Awesome. Thank you, Justin. Dr. Moncure.
My name is Michael Moncure, and I'm in Kansas City, Missouri. I'm a surgeon, trauma surgeon, and critical care surgeon, and I've been in Kansas City for about 21 years via New Jersey. And I'm also one of the associate medical directors at Midwest Transplant Network, and so I'm very happy to be here, Haiti, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Dr. Moncure, and really appreciate Dr. Moncure's dedication.
Yeah, please call me Michael.
Okay.
Please call me Michael.
Thank you, Michael, for joining us So I guess one thing I wanted to clarify up front is terminology. So I was reading about a little bit about what is the correct terminology in terms of, is it more appropriate to say African American ethnicity, Black American, although to me that doesn't really talk about what your ethnicity background is. I understand that African American are people who were descendants from slaves, but Black American could have different backgrounds and they came to the US via different ways in more recent years. What is your understanding, interpretation, and what's your preference? How do you identify it when somebody asks you? I put you all on the spot with that one. I didn't warn you on that one. I was just thinking about this.
To start out, I'm probably one of the oldest people on this panel, and so I've seen things kind of change or move and transition. And I would say that during the time when I was in college in the 80s and early 90s, the bottom line is kind of took a lot of pride in the term African American, because that there was a yearning for a diaspora and to have pride in the nation of origin which you came from. So, and I've noticed, things have kind of changed a little bit over the last couple of years, and particularly through what's been occurring over this last couple of months. But I'd be interested to find out what others think.
I agree. I grew up in West Texas, in the Panhandle, right outside of Lubbock, and in my younger time in the early '80s, and the term always, Black, for me was it just gave a different understanding. Black, white. For me, I'm just like, we're people, but there was always kind of a negative connotation with it as Black, and even maybe sometimes of how someone expressed it when they would say the word, was. Sometimes in my household, we talked about it, how they would reference it. And I just remember when things were coming around with African American, I related to that more, just knowing the heritage and understanding Black history, understanding, with slaves and people descended from Africa. It just, to me, it gave more meaning and a sense of being proud. And so that is a preference. I'm not offended if someone says I'm Black, but to me, I still felt to identify, because there's not a whole lot of history that, we learned in school in regards to outside of just saying slaves, that to know. So to me, it was just a deeper dive in understanding a little bit about my heritage and where I come from.
Yeah. Horatio, Shante, and Angelique, do any of you have a different perspective, or do you relate to what Justin is saying?
I can relate to what Justin is saying, that, I'm being born from coming from New York area and living in such a diverse city, it always seemed to me that saying Black kind of drew a line, because we started drawing, there are multiple lines that are drawn, especially when you live in New York City, where you're calling yourself a Black Hispanic or a white Hispanic. And, there was definitely a line that was drawn there. And so to me, it seemed I was able to better identify with African American, and not have to have that definition blur those lines, so that, you have a deeper dive, you have a deeper identity as to who you are, versus really establishing a line within your own community.
Yeah, and I remember with you, Shante, you telling me the story how you were asked by your organization to talk to this family in the hospital who were Black, and they said, oh, maybe it's better if you go talk to them, and you come out 5 minutes later and say, I can't talk to them. They speak Spanish. They're from Barbados. And that's the problem, right? That's my point of just looking at somebody's race doesn't tell me anything about them, right?
I was just going to say that, I come from the tri-state area of New York. I am based in California, and I've been here since before the 90s. I think it's around 87. when you label, someone African American, I can relate to that because that is my heritage, but everyone can't. Just because you're a person of color doesn't mean that you are African or from the lineage of Africa.
Right.
So we have to be careful in asking that person, how do you wish to be titled? As opposed to assuming that every brown person is African American. I accept both. I don't have a problem with being called Black or being called African American. Either one suits well with me, but that's not true for everyone.
Yeah. So really, Horatio?
Yeah, Angelique, I'm kind of on those lines. I grew up in a small town, not a whole lot of diversity, and we were black. I mean, it was just that's just the way it was. But when I got to college, it's a predominantly white school, but it was more diversity, and I found myself, being in the clubs where I saw more African American titles, African American student organizations, and different things like that. And I was a part of them, but I didn't have a problem with either way, Black or African American, um, because I was just comfortable in who I was, and that didn't bother me either way.
Yeah. Well, great, awesome. I appreciate you clarifying that for me, and kind of affirmed a lot of what my concerns or questions were or thoughts were around that as well. Now, do you believe that African Americans have commonly shared values that you're raised with? And if so, what are they? Because the nice thing is all of you represent different areas that you grew up in. So it would be kind of interesting to hear if you feel that commonly shared values.
I do. Yeah, I'll take that for a sec. I do. I grew up in West Texas, again, very small, not diverse. If someone was darker skinned like me, they were Black. If they were brown, they were Hispanic, and they're white, they're white. And being in New Jersey, it's so different. But also going to college to see all the different, ethnicities and backgrounds. I think for myself, one of the things that I found when I saw more African American people, more people that had the same values and things as myself, going to college, wanting to be educated. I played football. The things we always had in common was respect, not to talk when an elder was talking, to wait your turn, to when you walk into somebody's home, whether you know the people there or not, when you enter into a presence of someone, that you speak first, not the people that are there. I had one of my sister-in-laws, she would, when people would walk into her home, if they didn't speak, she would just ask them, hey, go outside and let's start this over, come back in. And so, and those were that's what brought us together, is that we all had that same thing. When a man entered the home, the women to be properly dressed. I remember my mom, or if my sister walked, into a room, if there was other males there, she, had to be properly dressed, covered up, respect, those were things that were extremely important. And then, again, making your bed in the morning, washing dishes before you go to bed. Those common values were what I felt was unique. And for me, being in a population in a small town I graduated with 7 or 8 that were African American, Black, out of about 80, but my high school had about 400 students, to then go to a university with 6,000 people or more. And everyone there that I sat in that same setting, we could share those same things. So I thought that was very unique, to grow up in a small part of West Texas, but to still share common things with so many people that looked just like me.
That's awesome. I saw you all were nodding and agreeing with Justin. I learned a couple new things there. So when you come into the house, you're supposed to say something first, not the person who is at the house. Okay, that's good to know. And then the women should be dressed nicely. Okay.
It's out of respect.
Appropriately.
Yes.
Covered appropriately.
Yes.
Covered appropriately. Okay, that's good to know.
I would echo a lot of what Justin said, and I think it has to do with the fact that all of us know, I'm growing up in Oakland, and but all of my relatives were from the South. Everyone's origin of landing, if you've been multiple generations in America, you all started out kind of the same place, and via slavery. So it makes complete sense that that's the case. And cleanliness is huge. I mean, as a matter of fact, yeah, I mean, I could tell you, every one of my relatives, they grew up with not very much, but whatever they had, it was clean, and they would the same. And if you probably brought them into a dirty house, they'd probably be afraid to sit down. And so it was like that for me.
No, they talk about you too. We talk about you if your house is dirty. Talk about you. I have to agree with everything everybody said. I think the underlying current is we've been raised with a level of respect, not only for ourselves, but for other people and how we present ourselves to other people. I think that has just been handed down from generation to generation. Everything Justin said, I'm sitting there going, yep, it's 100% true. I absolutely remember my stepson stepping into my mother's home and not speaking to anyone. And I took him back out and had a little chat. Like, we don't do that. You speak, you address people, you use proper titles. That's a big thing too. Although that's starting to fall off from when I was younger. It was either sir or ma'am or Mr. or Mrs. or Miss so-and-so. You never address an adult by their first name. As a child. That was just something that I was raised, but my roots are from the South. My family comes from Arkansas and Florida. So that whole Southern hospitality respect is very embedded in my upbringing. So it's starting to get looser. I notice kids don't do that as much anymore. I was a big sir, ma'am thing, and it's not there as much, but times change. So, but I think there's still a level of respect, cleanliness, speaking up, being clear, and looking people, there's so many. We could go down a whole list of things that you learn as looking people in the eye, exactly like, and, just being, present with where you are, being quiet when you're supposed to be quiet. That was big. Everybody knows in church. Like you're supposed to be quiet. Children are supposed to be what?
Being not heard.
That's right. Not heard. See, that's right. That's right.
All of those.
So
I can even remember just to take it to another level. I'm in my 50s, and I think it was only about 10 or 15 years ago, me addressing my aunt and calling her by her first name. She said, "I'm Aunt Maxine to you," and I'm like in shock because I'm old and a grown person, but it's not that.
Yeah. So a few of you mentioned respect, and respect is something that is very culturally influenced. There's different people identify respect differently. Like you said, the eye contact, in some cultures, it's actually disrespectful to make eye contact. So that's a good thing to know. Those are important things to know. What are there other things that you all want to share that are shared values that you think are important for people to know?
We're loud.
Yes, very loud, very outspoken, loud.
People come across that as being hostile, and it's not. It is just a part of the culture of people that even when we're happy, we're loud. Even when we're sad, we're loud. Even when we're mourning, we're loud. It makes other people uncomfortable, but it's very comfortable for Black people. And we understand it. We understand all of it, whether it's good or bad. It's just normal for us. So and I'm going to speak back to my days in One Legacy and being in those trauma units when families were grieving, and family is everything. I will say the root of everything for our culture people is family. And family doesn't mean everybody's blood related. And we'll right. As well, being in those times with Black families, and it's mobs of people, and they're loud and they're yelling and they're angry, and it's somebody up there is sick or dying, and you have the hospital and security being concerned, and me trying to explain that this is normal. Give them space, give them their own room, give them a room, so that they can be somewhere where they can be themselves. I said, because this is how they process things. This is what they're going to do. You're not going to stop them, but you need to allow them to be that. I mean, so it's a way of, most people don't understand that. It's the same thing as we're always angry. We look angry, we're hostile people, we're loud people. It's like, you need to understand it. That's kind of just a part of our culture.
Yeah, I agree. I think with our culture, we're like, I'm hearing what you're saying. We're very passionate. We love people. and we love life. Just like, this is not to take away from anyone else. It's just our expression of it is to be in that moment and be present, as we talked about, is when you're at the dinner table. I remember growing up, we all sat at the table. We didn't serve food until everyone was sitting down. We talked about things. You weren't allowed to be able to put your head down and just eat your food. You had to speak about different things. You had to ask questions or talk. And so with that strong bond about family, and that just the same as nowadays with technology, cell phones and that, you don't bring a phone to the table. You don't bring anything to the table. And you sure don't come to the table with your shirt off. So as a male, like, that was hugely important. You come to the table presentable. You know, you're not just going to come sit down and act like you can just sit there and do those things. And so I think that translates so much into our love of family. And that, and the way I'm saying that too, is those rules apply to everybody. So if someone comes to my house, and I grew up in a town that was a lot of black people, if somebody's white, Hispanic, or whatever, you're going to follow those same rules. You know, baby, come in here and sit down. Oh, no, we don't do that at the table here. You're going to get corrected, and you're going to be corrected and done at the same level as if it was me doing it. So my best friend, you're not going to get, hey, you know, you're not going to get that. It's going to be, hey, boy, come in here and sit down. And you know, we don't do that. Like, you know, you're going to, at that moment when you're in that house, you're under those same rules and those same guidelines. Mm-hmm. And so it translates to so much with that. Yeah.
And to piggyback on what's been said, you know, passion is, I think, a really good term, because I could tell you, I didn't start going to my family reunions for the Monkiers until probably about 8 years ago. And I will never miss another one, because all my other family reunions on my mother's side were the same. You know, that individuals, there's a sense of humor that is so infectious and so much fun that I mean, I can't even describe it. And everyone's able to give each other, you know, a little bit of a hard time, and but they know that there's love there, and there's just so much in common. I'm dragging you to it, Horatio. The next time it's in Jackson, all right?
Hey, yeah, let me know.
Okay. All right.
We have our family reunions every 2 years, and since I can remember, and I've never missed one. And it's just something about that unity, sharing laughs, then you sharing your cries, and it's never an argument. Everyone's getting along. It's fun. Again, that passion. It's just that love for one another. And like Angelique said before, we're loud. Yeah. We're loud. We have a family band.
The sense of family reunions has, you know, for Blacks, African American families, has put that sense of unity amongst us all, in that sense of togetherness, which, you know, could also be, you know, tied back to the separation during slavery. And so now that we're past that, and being able to be together and keeping up with family members and keeping up with our loved ones and keeping our lineage going on, is huge in the Black community.
That's an interesting correlation you're drawing. That would make a lot of sense. And yeah, I'm smiling as you guys are talking, because one, I always feel left out when I see those family reunions. I'm like, they're having way too much fun. I want to be there. But also,
I will drag you there too, Hayden.
If you see a family reunion, you're invited. Just
yes, absolutely.
Every
gonna feed you. Gonna feed you and gonna.
Come on.
Yep. And
invited.
You don't be shy.
The food
have to speak.
is
the food.
The food. Oh my God. Every
family
holiday and family reunion, oh my God, it's such a rich celebration, and there's so much importance played upon that, and there's so much preparation, and people take so much pride in that. Incredible.
It's amazing. And then I've seen, is this common as well? A lot of people wear the family T-shirt where it says the family name. Mm-hmm. Is that like a?
You gotta have that.
Gotta have a theme. You have to have a theme. You have to have a theme.
Okay.
You got to have a theme to bring it to that puts it all together. You got to have a theme.
That's awesome.
We probably all have those T-shirts in our closet. We'll probably never wear them, but all are different colors. So we got them.
Loud colors.
I wear
Loud colors. Loud colors.
The whole reunion, we wear all of them.
Mhm.
So it sounds to me like from what you all are describing that it doesn't matter where you grew up in the US, if you grow up in an African American household, these are all things that you feel like you have in common that are shared values and cultural kind of customs and expectations that you're raised with.
Yep.
Yeah, there are things that I kind of noticed when I, just like Justin said, when he went to college, and Horatio said, I didn't really know that it was common amongst everyone, but all my friends, I went to USC, and so in LA, and so I had friends from all around the country that also, but they all had grandmothers that had the plastic covering over the furniture, and the house was at 80 or 90 degrees.
My mama had it too.
Yeah.
To preserve the
Move the
furniture.
plastic, man. You're sitting on the good part.
Yeah, I mean, they're expensive. Of course, you want to preserve them.
Yes, absolutely.
So who's typically the cultural decision maker in the family? Is there such a thing, or is that family dependent?
I think it's family dependent. I wrote it down. I
varies.
think it's primarily, it varies, but I think commonly it's the eldest mom. It's the female at the highest. So either great grandmother, grandmother, or mother.
Mhm.
I think is typically the primary decision maker.
On how it
And it's
comes
just,
out.
Yeah.
yes. I think whoever's highest in the, we talk all the time, especially in donation, about who's the highest in the order.
Yeah.
In the African American community, I'm gonna tell you that that's always that's followed. There's a hierarchy, and it trickles down, and that's really usually where it goes. You go to Big Mama. If Big Mama's there, that's
Big Mama.
what Big Mama says. What Big Mama says.
We all had a Big Mama.
Yeah.
And
Right.
that was my great grandmother.
Gigi,
Mama.
Mama
Whatever she
Dukes,
said, that was it.
whatever, whatever her term is, that's who makes a lot of the decisions.
Yeah.
But I think breaking it down to the individual families, it still could vary between, father, mother, but overall, the family unit of all, it is the eldest grandmother, I think.
So like you said, Justin, it's important. Sorry,
I was
Dr.
just
Mo.
saying, you could make a decision, but it could definitely be overridden.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so it's important not to make an assumption, but to check with each family ultimately who is really the decision maker in the family. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So Angelique, you kind of started touching on this a little bit, but what are there times, and if so, in what ways do you think that someone might misunderstand an African American? I mean, do you feel like there are times that African Americans are misunderstood, and if so, in what way?
Oh, I would definitely think so. I mean, definitely with our loudness. That's one avenue that I think people are uncomfortable. I think sometimes, I've been misunderstood a lot of times. I've been misunderstood for being too doggone happy.
Right.
I've never understood that. How are you so happy every day? I don't know. I just am. But I think, when we talk about a race of people, we are oftentimes misunderstood. I mean, not to get into what's happening today, but sometimes, our Black men are misunderstood. Again, they're assumed to be, dangerous just by being. And maybe it could be, they're not smiling. I've even had to say to my husband, depending on where we're going, put your happy face on. We're going into this. I mean, like, all of these things come about because we're trying to keep people safe. I mean, and ensure that they're not misunderstood and not mistaken for being a thief or dangerous or harmful to others. I mean, I think those are the avenues that we need to be careful as a society when we look at a race of people, is the assumption of either how they look, how they're dressed, their countenance, what they're saying, not saying, where they stand, how they're standing, and it's everything. I think we're oftentimes, as a race of people, misunderstood just for being who we are, and that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate. I'll let other people chime in.
There are, those, I can agree with those assumptions that, and those theories of being misunderstood, especially our Black men. I even, so much as, Haiti, you've met my son, who is 6'2", and people automatically assume one way or the other, either that, he either looks like a thug because he has dreads on, but, he's a senior at Arizona State University. Or they assume that he's a basketball player, and he will speak up all the time, and say, why can't I just be a college student? To not make those assumptions about a particular person just by the way that they look. And I think, it's unfortunate in our society that, and not so much even just our Black men, our Black men obviously are very much misunderstood, but even Black women, I think Black women are misunderstood, especially when we speak up and when we are very direct and to the point, that we're now, mischaracterized as being angry Black women. And versus someone who is white, who says the same exact thing and their point is taken. So I think there are other assumptions there too.
Yeah, and I think those are really important points, because if you look at the latest current events, it's those assumptions that put our lives at risk, and it's usually the police that make that assumption, and then it escalates. And so when people probably roll their eyes when we talked about the fact that I've got 2 sons and 2 daughters, and they're both over 6'2", 6'3", and so when we talk about giving them the talk, I don't think anyone really fathomed that, or they just chose not to. But when it's there on video, you see exactly why.
Yeah. I think just by sheer numbers, growing up, I'm gonna go back to growing up in a small town. It was probably less than 3% Black, and majority of my friends and people that I knew, they didn't own a home, they rented. There was no business owners. There wasn't many people that looked like me that were in positions of power, and so a lot lived across the tracks, if you will. So just by sheer number, most people had their own assumptions that's the life of what someone that is Black African American lives. They don't have an education. This is their destiny, is to be there. And I will say, even for me as a young kid and not learning certain things in school, I always learned it at home from what my heritage and being proud of who I am, and that from my parents. But when you're faced in school with people all the time and they don't look like you, there is assumptions made. And it wasn't really until I got to college to see that there were other males and females that looked just like me that had the same aspirations to get an education, to better themselves. They had, for a dream. And again, I think Shantae said it, and I wrote it down when I was looking at it, is that they didn't all play sports. They weren't all athletic. And so it wasn't this assumption that they got into school because they could dribble a basketball or throw a football or run fast. Some of them were there just by what was between their ears. And I think by that sheer number, to me, I was like, man, I wish my whole community in my small town could come to college and witness this. Or I remember the first time going to Washington, D.C. and walking around and seeing so many people that looked like me that were in professional jobs. And I'm like, I wish I could pull all of the people in the South to come see this, because then I think then there would be less of a misunderstanding. There would be less of a fear. And even my friends that didn't look like me, once they came into my household, once they listened to my parents and talked to them, I had a couple of friends that reached out of recent and said, man, I'm sorry of all that's going on, but I just love your family. That's what it's about. If you take the time to just come sit and learn and listen, you're going to hear the same things that are said in your household that are said in my household, maybe a little different, but we really do have the same common goal and theme. It's not what you think. Even at the family reunions, that's not a rally for us to come around and talk about how we're oppressed or how we can't get here or get there. Big Mama's always saying, baby, get your education, get that piece of paper. Nobody can take that away from you. People are telling you, and they're not telling you about the obstacles. They're telling you, go work harder. My dad always he used to talk to me about, he said, I don't care, son, if you become a trash man or a ditch digger. If you do that, you dig that ditch and be the best at it. And that taught me something as I learned to grow. Because when I'm little, you're like, I won't dig no ditches. I won't be no trash man. But as you learn and you grow, you start thinking about taking pride in what you do. That's all he was telling me. Because he would always say, you're gonna be better for it. When my sister would be outside working with me or working in the house, and all of a sudden I didn't see her anymore, she's gone and hiding, and now I'm doing all the work. I would say, Dad, Crystal ain't here. She ain't helping me. He'd say, don't worry about what she's doing. Because he always told me, if you work hard, people will notice. Because if you notice what other people aren't doing, then you aren't doing what you're supposed to do. So again, I think it's just that it saddens me that there's so much misunderstanding and people that want to ignore it. And I'll give you one last thing. I know I'm talking a lot. One thing about me that's unique, my wife is Hispanic. And the crazy thing about it, I have twin boys. One is almost my color, and one is almost, looks as light as Haiti. And I can remember when they were young playing baseball, the difference in how they were treated. My son that is lighter skinned would always talk about how, like, Dad, I don't have to deal with some of the same things Matt has to deal with. He was afforded different opportunities, and people didn't even know they were twins. So that was always unique. At times people would question it or not. So they got to live that every single day, to see the difference in how Matt was treated versus how Zach was treated. And now Zach, my lighter skinned son, now he's 6'1", but he has dreadlocks. He's fully tatted. And so now himself with that, now he gets to see, how the world looks at him a little different now. So then he gets to see those same things. So it's just, it's just unique things you learn along the way. But I think it's just so much the misunderstanding of how we are, the aggressive behavior in that. Because again, those are the same things that afford us to be good at sports, to be good at what we do, whatever our profession is, because we're passionate, we're aggressive. That's just us. That's what makes us who we are. And I think it should be embraced and not feared and not pushed away.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
Haiti, can I add one more thing that might be misunderstood? And that's assuming that there's no father in the home. I think there's a large assumption that, there's never a father in the home, and that is just simply not true. Every culture of people has divorced parents or no father in the home. That is not the case for all Black and African American families. There are oftentimes wonderful fathers that raise their children that are there. Justin is there as a perfect example. My husband, a perfect example, although he and his wife are not together, a constant father. We have to stop assuming that there is never a father in the home as well.
Yeah, really important. Horatio, did you want to add anything?
Just kind of a little bit off of what Justin was saying, as far as the people being misunderstood based on their appearance, the dreads and tatted up. My son, he's 23, and he has the dreads. He's tatted, and I don't have any of that. And and we both, and being that he looks that way, he's judged totally different. We have the same values. I know what he's been taught. We sit down and we talk, and he has the same values, but some of his experiences that he's had based on his looks have really been bad. And I don't understand it because I never experienced that. And so I just really would, and not only, it's from all races that they judge that.
Right.
Black, white, every race judge someone on that. And I wish that we wouldn't, because again, this is about getting understanding. And you talk to someone, you could feel them out. You know where they stand, you know what they believe, but just jumping to this conclusion or just having these preconceived notions in your mind that this is an individual I have to watch out for. I need to lock my door. I need to clench my purse tighter. Not everyone's like that. So it's about opening the dialogue and just talking with someone and just really understanding where they come from.
I think that's a really important point. We all have biases, right? There are certain things that we struggle with. And ultimately, if we just say, okay, I'm going to counter this and I'm going to just ask some questions and get to know this person, we realize we're all human beings. We're all part of the human race, right? We all have shared desires to want to belong, to want to be accepted, to want to fit in, to want to achieve certain goals. And everyone has different goals, whether that includes education or other types of achievements. But there's just so much that we share in common, but it's so easy for our biases to just kind of create that barrier and stop us from taking that next step. So what is something you, and maybe you kind of answered this already, because you talked a lot about the passion and the loudness and how that is so easily misunderstood by other people. What is something you wish others would know or understand about African Americans? And you kind of mentioned the father is not always absent, like some people like to make it out to be. Is there anything else you want to add to anything that you've said so far?
I think one thing I would point out is we love to help those in need. If you take a step and look, there's so many African American people that are in healthcare.
Yeah.
You see so many that are that teach special education, whether it be as a teacher or as an aide. State schools, MHMR. You see that there's a true love to help those, and even to the point of taking care of your elders. I think there's a strong bond in the African American community. You don't put mom in a nursing home. You don't put dad in a nursing home. You sacrifice to bring them in their home, put them in close proximity to you where you can see after them. And that is, and if you don't, as we talked about with the dirty homes and different things how you're talked about, you get talked about like that. You know, so-and-so that they put Miss May in a nursing home. I just don't understand that. All she done for them, well, you know, that's, you get talked about and you get looked at a little different. Even after they're gone, you're going to get looked at differently because you didn't make that sacrifice because they made so many for you. So I think with that history and that understanding, I wish people would understand that. Don't assume. And then so much more. I wish there was just more avenues for people to understand and learn Black history and culture. I just wish there was the same avenues in schools. I understand it is in college, but college, that's a small percentage of people. If it was more in grade school, high school, in those areas where it was actually required curriculum, I think we would see less of a division because people then would understand and know what our footprint has been on advances in society, advances in technology, and all those things. And then there would be less of an assumption. So those are some of the things, and I wrote that down, but I'm telling you, there's not a place where you will see, you go to a place that's like MHMR, special ed, hospitals, and that, you're going to see people and they're going to be taking care of people. And that's what we like to do. And we do it regardless of how you see us. You know,
I would definitely agree with what Justin said. And that obviously is putting us at risk in regards to COVID because we're in these roles where we're essential. And so we have higher rates of these infections. But I can definitely tell you that I have relatives that probably had nothing. But if you needed something, they would give you everything. And that is just something that's just understood. And if somebody needs something within the family, it's done. And I can tell you, I've seen that all across the world. I've gone to Haiti, I've gone to East Africa for mission trips and everything. And people that make $1 a week or whatever, they could find, a couple dollars to help their relative be treated, and they will make sure they bring them, food and sustenance, and they'll be there to help take care of them in a hospital setting, and they'll do whatever. And that's the same in our culture in the United States. And the other thing I would piggyback, not only knowing, what contribution we've had to the history of the United States, but also the world. If you look at what's happened on the continent, we've had the most advanced societies that have ever lived. And there are lots of cultures that have gone there to take away from that. And that's from north to south. And so I think if people were to understand that and understand the intellectual capacity of African American Black people, they would have a better appreciation. And those people that did grow up in some of these societies that didn't have to deal with a lot of the systemic racism. If you look at Jamaica, you look at Nigeria, those people, when they come here, they have the highest educational attainments than any other culture, period. All right. And they make money, they work hard. And I mean, they haven't had to deal with a lot of stuff probably early on. But so when our president says these are S-hole countries and everything, that is like total misunderstanding, misconception, and just prejudice, straight out prejudice.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting what you'll share. I never thought of it in this way. When you learn cross-cultural communication, you learn about individualistic societies and collectivist societies. Collectivist societies are a lot more about their families and the extended family and not bringing shame to your family. And it's interesting because what I'm hearing you describe is very much a collectivist type of mindset and culture amongst African Americans, but yet the US in itself is the most individualistic society you can be in comparison to the rest of the world. And so it's no wonder that it's easily misunderstood, right? And that you get this rubbing of misunderstandings that's happening, and when people don't realize how important a family might be, and not just the immediate blood family, like you said, families who you define to be family versus blood relative necessarily. Interesting. Now, are there certain health now for, hopefully, and many people who are watching this are going to be working in the healthcare arena. Are there certain health or healthcare beliefs that are commonly shared amongst African Americans? And if applicable, how do we best overcome them? If there are certain barriers and challenges, or what is your perspective?
I think among the African American community, there is some distrust in the healthcare industry, and it's not without cause. Historically, I mean, what really just jumped to mind is the Tuskegee experiment.
Right.
It's not that far removed, and when I say it's not too far removed, my uncles and aunts, I mean, they grew up when that was going on. Not that they were a part of it, thank God, but they grew up when that was going on. And going back to the decision makers for our families, the matriarch, our grandparents, and the oldest, they experienced that. So that distrust is with them, and they passed it down to my generation. And so if we're not educating and up on our, knowledge of what's going on, we will really easily fall into that trap. So I think now, being that my generation, there's more access to information. We're able to Google things, and we're able to research more, and we're just not taking the first word. I think that helps create some transparency and help us overcome some of the barriers. But overall, I think the distrust is there.
So Horatio, for those people who are listening in who may not be aware of what the Tuskegee era was about, do you mind expanding briefly what that was about? Yeah,
it was a study done, Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, where and it ran for 40 years, from 32 to 72, where they would they told African American males that they were giving them free health care. And this is from the government. And in that, they were injecting them with syphilis as a trial, just to see how it would manifest untreated. And that way they would know how to treat others. But once they found a cure or a treatment for it, they still didn't treat their Americans. They just let it run its course just to see what symptoms would manifest. and there was a whistleblower, thank God, and all of that came to light. But our men, we went into that blindly and trusting
Mhm.
what was being told, and just kind of went with it. And I think that was the
And this wasn't settled till the Clinton era, I believe, right? Clinton era, there
yeah,
was a $1
no,
million settlement, which is peanuts for all the suffering many families went through for all of those years. And yeah, it's hard to imagine that only $1 million. It just, yeah. But
I think everyone on this call could probably say the same thing. I mean, a lot of what we said to build up to this particular question, really are important. Rachel mentioned distrust. And I grew up in Oakland, where I mean they basically saw a rise of the Black Panther Party, and so to combat that, they flooded drugs on the streets to basically debilitate a whole generation of people. And so, and all these things are starting to come out now, and before they were thought to be conspiracies, but it's true. So when you deal with the African American family, particularly when you're talking about donation, or you're talking about, I mean, no one's trying to get operated on. So, I mean, when you are talking about some kind of aggressive treatment, it is really important you go and you look them in the eye and you spend time with them and you start to garner that trust and you start to explain things in a manner you have to. It's a little bit more from that standpoint. If you go in there and do all the things that we talked about, that we wouldn't even have you in your house, in our house. You won't speak, you won't look us in the eye, you won't do anything. That's probably not going to work, right? So I think knowing those lessons that we talked about will really help you. But distrust, and it's been earned. And I could tell you, I get phone calls probably once or twice a month from relatives from east to west that are undergoing things, and they want to bounce it off of someone that knows about healthcare. And it's when I'm able to tell them, because they have my trust, I have their trust, then they're okay, and they'll go along with it.
so how do I, as a non-African American in healthcare, garner somebody's trust, an African American's trust, through making that eye contact, getting eye time, being very sincere and genuine and open, or is there anything else I should be doing?
Be firm in your stance of what you're talking about and know what you're talking about. Don't allow me to ask you a question and you stumble over it and not be willing to be vulnerable to say, let me go check on that and I'll get back to you. If you try to then put something in there, or you take back, then all of a sudden it's like, no, we don't want to do it. And that's what I come to donation. When I started in the donation world, one of the reasons my boss told me he wanted to hire me is because the lady that was retiring was African American, and he needed somebody that could approach African American families. And one of the things I told him, I was like, I don't believe that to be helpful, but okay, that's fine. I want to do this, but that's, and I've always told him, it doesn't matter what the person looks like. If they go in and speak and look at people in their eyes, if they're comfortable, you have to be comfortable in the presence. You can't let the screaming, the hollering, or whatever shake you. And if you can do that and be at that level, don't sit down unless I ask you to sit down. Certain things, then we can go you can paint that picture for me, because that's what we want. We want you to paint that picture. Give me all the ins and outs. Because of the mistrust, because of the Tuskegee projects and some of the things that have gone on, those are some of the things I've spoke about sitting on a resource consortium when there's been talks about, there's other project, the Apollo project that came out. And one of the things I told, I think Ellen, that was at that time, I said, you need to, because it was going to be kind of blinded where they weren't going to tell people. I said, no, it's not the way to go. That's not the way to go. Even as small that, yes, this is, be a collection of urine and those things for this project, still, it's bigger than that. And you got to know the history to understand, because you can set things back further. And now it's going to impact donation when we're talking to families about organ and tissue donation in a whole different way. But that speaks to anything. So I think I think it's just all about being confident and knowing what you're talking about. and being willing to be in that, the same moments that we talked about, how we're in the moment with each other, you have to be in that moment with us. And don't.
You bring up two really good points, Justin. The one point of, if there's already a history of mistrust and deception in healthcare, we need to do everything to make sure we're as transparent as we can be, obviously in context with what's appropriate at that time for that family, but there can't be anything that's hidden or blinded that then will just blow up as another area that we weren't being honest about, right? And then the second thing I really appreciate you affirming, because I've always held this belief too, it should be based on who you are, who's talking to the family, and what your race is. It's more about how I come to a person who is of a different cultural background and how I communicate and interact in context of their culture and what's important to them, right? And part of that means letting them be my teacher, letting them show me the way, and to just maybe even frankly say, I don't know much about your culture. Can you teach me what's important to you so that I can communicate more effectively and meet your needs? And just see what they say. Do you think
that's
that
very
would be
true? That's very true. And I use the analogy when I've spoken to another friend of mine, when we talk about race and cultures and people, and that I said, it's like dancing.
Mm-hmm.
This is a dance.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you got to be willing to take the lead.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't know how to do the certain steps, take the lead and help me. But when we switch up from whatever style to a different style, if I know it better, let me take the lead. And if we can dance together,
Mm-hmm.
then there's that that's what it's all about. It's that song and dance of being able to do that and knowing when to sit back and to absorb and listen, and then when to interject and give that. And I think that's all the common, it's all, and again, it goes back to the one thing we talked about commonly, respect.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to hear, if I'm going to hear you out, you're going to hear me out.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless if I start down the rabbit trail and in the weeds, just hear me out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm coming back to a theme. I'm coming, let me go there. Let me go there. If you let me go there, then we're going to be okay. But if you try to talk to me to try to pull me off that path,
Mm-hmm.
we're done. We're not going to get there.
Yeah.
And the other thing that goes back to the, assumptions and implicit bias. I've seen people go into a room and say, "Oh, this is a Hispanic family. This is an African American family. We're not going to be able to get no donation." And guess what?
You won't.
It's 100%.
They got the bracelet on already. When you walk in the room, they got the bracelets on and everything already.
It's like, who was it who said, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right?
Right.
Yeah.
I think
So-
sometimes there's an assumption too that you have to send in the Black person for the Black family and
Right.
the Spanish person for the Spanish family. We need to get rid of that as well, because let's face it. I mean, I've been in situations where I've been that person. I'm like, they don't trust me either yet. I said, so there's
Right.
there's a bond here because we're the same culture, same race. I said, but I still have to build that type of connection with that family as well, especially
Right.
when we're talking about healthcare. That in-depth feeling of distrust is bigger than my connection with them as being the same color as they are. It's bigger.
Right.
I have had to build that trust with that family myself from square one. And that's just finding that avenue toward them. So there needs to be that, stop assuming that it has to be that same race of person that goes in to see that same race of family.
Mm-hmm.
Not
Doesn't.
always the case. It doesn't always work that way.
I so appreciate you saying that, because that's my philosophy and belief too. I think, and it's a huge risk, like we talked about earlier on when Shante was asked to talk to this Black family, and she's like, "You speak Spanish, they're from Barbados." I can't talk to them. And that's a problem. And if you look at other cultures, for example, you could be sending people in to talk to somebody who's from a country that they're at war with, literally, you know. And so that's something else that we have to be mindful of. And so I think, to all of you guys' point, it's more about being willing to be humble and meet them where they are, right? Versus and building that trust, like you said, and being very transparent. So are there commonly held beliefs about death among African Americans? Is there anything that brings meaning in death to African Americans?
I think we're very religious. God
much.
holds the key.
Mhm.
It's not over until, I got to put it in God's hands. He's the healer. He's the end all. And that's until I know, till that sign is given, I'm not giving up. That can be very common, not all of sort, but still very common, of that being hard to let go. And I think that piece that we all talk about is, I find very common in the African American community, people talking about knowing someone's heart and knowing where they went to church, they knew God, they're going to heaven. So that's that firm piece of, okay, yeah, he's okay or she's okay. We can let them go or whatnot. So I think those are two where I found very common things, and not only personally but professionally in dealing with families as a bedside nurse, and that I've been able to see over over the years.
Mhm.
I think it's also important to know that, and I'm not speaking for all African American cultures, Black cultures, that death is not something that we like to plan. You'll find that our culture of people don't always want to, get that insurance, and set those do that will, It's like when you speak about it, you bring it about. That's kind of ingrained, and so especially for people in my mother's generation and my parents, and they don't necessarily want to talk about that. They don't actually want to, some do. They buy those plots because, that's where they want to be. But then there are some that just, let's talk about Aretha Franklin. Here is an iconic, very wealthy woman that never wrote a will. She never disseminated any of her assets or wishes to anyone. And it's very common. It's just very common. It's something to understand about that. They sometimes don't want to talk about that, especially when you're talking about organ donation, you're talking about brain death, where they don't always understand that the person is dead. And then they're still holding on to hope. So it's really, you have to get them to understand the death before you really even start to have that conversation. And we already know that already. But really, it's understanding that they don't want to understand the death. They just don't want to go to that side, because bringing that to the fold and making that a reality makes it actually happen. And that's hard.
There's a lot of emphasis on the power of the spoken word.
Yes.
Would you agree?
Yes.
So we have to be very careful in how we frame things and what we say.
I would 100% agree with what you just said, from the standpoint that I try to make it a point when I'm pronouncing someone from an African American family. I will do everything I can to make sure the family's there when I'm doing that entire thing, and I'll explain before, explain during, and explain after, to the point where I do it for everyone now. But even more so because it is easy to dispel, what I'm saying, and to say, oh, you still got a chance, and until they really see it in concrete terms. There's a lot of people in America, a lot of cultures like that, but I would say that's really important.
And I think Justin hit on a point about our religion, and church is a foundation of a lot of our culture, and remembering what that is. And it's different. When you talk about religion and churches, everyone has a different type of style and learned a different way and different things. So it's really understanding what they want and in what their beliefs are, when you're speaking to them, and what would make them comfortable. It's really asking, and really it's listening, because we are going to talk. So it's really just listening to what they're saying and asking those open-ended questions. Like Michael just said, when you're talking to these families, it's really getting them to understand. And for goodness sake, please speak slower when it comes to healthcare. Repeat it 1,000 times and speak slower. We all know that they're only getting a certain percentage of this information in general, but for our culture of people, we need to really slow down that conversation and then ask them if they understand. I think that's sometimes missing in the conversation when it comes to especially in traumatic instances, you're speaking. So if I just had a friend her parents were in a car accident, and they called me to try and understand what the doctor just talked to them about, because they just didn't get it. And so I said, you need to ask them to slow down and repeat it again and break down what they said, because their minds are going 1,000 clicks a minute. And this is true for anyone. But for our culture of people, slow down, look them in the eye, and ask them if they understand.
Mm-hmm.
And I will tell you 100%, just what she just said. If you try to rush it or speed it up, they feel as if you're trying to do something. You're trying to pull a fast one. You're we're going to slow this down even further. So it's going to have the converse reaction.
Yeah, and that maybe you're just being dismissive and not being respectful of the time that they need to have a clarity on what's happening. Yeah, really, really great points. Now, I think you kind of all spoke to this, and I'm realizing the time. I think we could go on for a long time here. So just a couple more questions to wrap it up. You spoke on this earlier. I don't know if you want to add anything further. Are there certain principles I should be aware of when I'm interacting with African Americans in terms of do's and don'ts? You talked about the importance of eye contact. You talked about the importance of being direct and being very upfront and being open to laughing and being open to being loud. Are there any other things in terms of do's and don'ts?
I think don'ts, or even a do, I guess you could turn around and say a do, is when you're having conversations, be normal. Ask me questions that you would normally ask anybody else to break the ice to get to know them. Just because I'm African American, Black, however you see it, don't ask me just a random question because you think that's a question that you need to ask to understand. I'm human just like you.
Can you give an example, Justin? What do you mean by that?
Again, I think Angelique spoke on it. Don't assume, don't ask if I have a father at home or where's your dad, or did you grow up in a complete home? Who asked that question? But I've had people ask that. Did you grow up in a complete home? Like, whoa, yeah, I had mom, dad, grandmother, traditional family. A lot of my friends the same. But what if I didn't? What difference does it make? But at the same time, don't assume. I think those true myths that could be, don't just randomly ask me that. Or and also, just because you're comfortable being around African American people, don't kid around about the culture and history.
Oh gosh, I was going to say that.
If you just because you got 3 Black friends and y'all talk and those 3 Black friends that you know real well, they give you the ins and outs and they talk, they use the language and that. Don't automatically assume that you can come and talk to me, and just because I look like your 3 friends, that you can say those same things, because I may find it offensive.
Exactly.
That's just the reality. I mean, you just and I think that's the thing that people, again, now we're pegged all into this one box, that we all use Ebonics, that we all listen to rap music. I mean, don't make that mistake. I don't even make that mistake when I'm talking to someone. I'm in New Jersey now. I'm from the South. I'm from Texas. So I don't ask the same, but I'm not gonna go up to a Black person and start asking just random questions. I want to get to know them, and understand where they come from, because I've already found there's people I talk to, they like classical music. They have nothing to do with sports. And I'm a sports fanatic, and I listen to R&B and rap. So I got to understand how I'm going to interact with my fellow man here. And he looks just like me, but we have very different views, and that's okay. That's the beauty of the world. So I think that's the deal, that even for myself, I feel like I think the good Lord brought me to New Jersey to really just see a different side of life, because it is very true. It is, people are very different.
Yeah. I think, Rachel, you've been a little quiet. Anything you want to add?
No, Justin's right on, man. He's dead on it. You're on fire this morning. Yeah, just like he was saying, those assumptions, just because, I mean, don't put me in a box. Just treat me just like you would treat anybody else. I don't have to have any extra favors. I don't have to just do me the same as you do would treat anybody else. And if I stand out, I stand out. But I don't need anything else. Just talk to me normal.
That's it.
It sucks to be stereotyped, right?
Yeah.
it happens, I think, to all of us, but nobody likes it, but yet we tend to do it to other people, right? So we have to be aware how we don't like it, so why would we do it?
Yeah, don't once you start off poorly, it's going to be almost impossible to make it up, because what Maya Angelou said is what probably all of our great grandmothers and grandmothers and mothers and fathers and all generations, once they show you who they are, believe it.
That's right. 100%. 100%.
No, if you come with respect, you come with sincerity, and you just come with empathy in certain situations, we're going to be open and receptive to you, and we'll be more apt to hear what you're saying and trust you more. And that's just anybody. I mean, I can't think of, that's just not a Black culture thing. It's just anybody.
Right.
And it's a human thing, I would say. And that's what we need to get to, more of a human level of treating each other, as opposed to, cultural or specific races. And I think that's where our society needs help, and we need to improve in those areas. And that's what I'm hopeful for.
Yeah.
And I think a huge don't, as I'm Generation X, and I understand by the shoulders that I stand on that I've been afforded to be able to be free, to go to college, to be able to do all the things that I want to do. And sometimes I've had to take 20 steps versus someone in the same situation to take 10. I get that. But don't be dismissive of racism. Don't be dismissive. If I share a story and tell you of a situation, don't be dismissive as I'm playing the race card, or don't be dismissive in general, even if you don't discriminate against someone. I find that very common amongst a lot of my high school classmates. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, you've done well, Justin. What's the big deal? Like, people can't be like you. Like, no, let's understand. Mm-hmm. We all grow up differently. I mean, and it's not even about race. Just think about certain people that are at home and grow up in a broken home, or grow up in a home where they're not told that they can be successful or not. Mm-hmm. They may not break out of that shadow. They may not break out of those. They may not break that cycle. Mm-hmm. There are some of us, the same people that are sitting here on this call, that have had people in their life tell them, "Oh, you can be somebody. Oh, you can do something. You just take it on." And I think you have to have that, because there are barriers. And I just hate, I won't say hate, I strongly dislike when people are very dismissive of that and make out that it doesn't exist just because it doesn't exist with them. It's a whole big world out there. You're just one person. So you got to understand that there's obstacles.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest change. That's the biggest change over this last couple, in that for whatever reason, I mean, visibility or what have you, I mean, people are maybe a little bit more understanding that of some of the obstacles that we have. And so we've got to understand, I think what Justin just said is so important, that I do a lot of research on interpersonal violence and everything. And everyone wants to attribute, we just told you what the values are in African-American culture. It has nothing to do with any of the stuff that's been happening in cities. But if you put anybody in a situation where you have horrible schools, horrible neighborhoods, or your economic situation, it's almost impossible to get ahead, and you have trauma by police, by whatever, there is no way that if you make it out of that, you are going to be at the top of the crop just because of what you've had to overcome. Yeah. But you got to realize that that's the real cause.
Right. And there's an author who has done a lot of research on cross-cultural communication, and he talks about how culture is very much ingrained in the first 12 years of our lives. I agree with that to some extent. There's certain cultural values and experiences that very much define you. If you experience them in the first 12 years of your life, especially on a regular basis, you can carry those with you for the rest of your life, Now, of course, your own values, you change over time, but it's important to, like Justin, like you said, not to dismiss, well, you did well for yourself. Well, that doesn't mean it hasn't been hard, and that you still carry with you. That's your life, that's your experience. Yeah. Now, is there a question you feel I should have asked that I didn't ask?
I think the topics that, the questions that you've asked are questions that everyone, whether you're Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, we need to be asking each other on a day-to-day basis. We need to have open lines of communication. We need to be able to understand each other as individuals and also as a community. And so, I hope that there's more dialogue outside of this, moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. I'll be doing more episodes of Love Thy Neighbor with various ethnicities and nationalities, but also if you all feel like, hey, we could use a part 2 on African Americans, please let me know if there's more things that you feel that we should be talking about. One last question I have for each one of you, and then we'll wrap it up. The final question that I would like to hear from each of you, tell me one thing that you love about the commonly shared cultural practices or values of African Americans. What's your favorite thing? Horatio, let's start with you, or am I putting you on the spot with that?
Yeah, you are, but we'll roll with it. What I love is some of the things we talked about today, the passion and the love for people. And I think Michael talked a little bit about Jackson State. If they had a tailgate or party right now, I can just walk out there, not knowing anybody, but start a conversation and they welcome me in like I've been there all the time. So that love and that passion for people is what I like.
Mm-hmm. Great. How about you, Michael?
I would say that because I almost feel like everyone on this call is part of my family. And I mean, there's so many things that are common. The other thing is our creativity. I mean, it is fantastic and exceptional. And if you look all over the world, the things that we've created in this society in the United States as African Americans are disseminated all across the world and adopted, whether it be fashion, whether it be music, whether it be literature, whether it be drama or acting or whatever. I mean, it's phenomenal.
Awesome. So Justin, how about you?
I think the common theme for me is acceptance. To elaborate on that is just that love for people. The acceptance piece is, even when I think back to my younger days when it was it was not talked about, as far as sexuality, gay, straight. It seemed like in the African American community, there was always that acceptance of anyone, regardless of that, and that love. To me, just that acceptance, I think one thing people need to understand is how accepting, regardless of all the trauma, regardless of all the things that have gone on that we see every day now that's being recorded, it's always happened. Just as now we have phones to record it, that people need to understand African American people are willing to accept and willing to not forget, but to forgive enough to move forward. And that's one of the things that I hear so often when I'm in any circle, regardless of who I'm talking to, that looks like me, wherever they live, whatever state. These same people on this panel would tell you the same thing, is that anger and hatred that's being persuaded in the media, that we just hate people, we hate, the white man, we just hate it. No, it's not that. We just want to be valued and allow that understanding to just stand on common ground, to be viewed as people. And I think that's one thing I love. I think that is one hit that we have right, and we've always had that right.
Awesome. Shantae, how about you?
When you put Angelique and I at the end of this, you end up summing up what everyone says, because I think we've all, had some very valid points in what we believe in and what we appreciate about our own culture. The unity, the acceptance, the bright minds. I am friends with some of the most amazing and most creative people. Even not even to only brag on my own kid, who is just absolutely creative and brilliant in the things that he does without even having to work too hard for it. And being able to appreciate those and and see people do so well. And hopefully we can, bring others along with us in that who are struggling.
Awesome. Thank you, Shante. Angelique, last but not least.
I mean, I can't even say that I don't reiterate every single thing that each one of them have said, but I was gonna, it's the bond. It's the bond that we have. It's the silent, unseen bond that we have as a culture of people when we're around each other, whether we've met before or we have never met. There is a bond there that's undescribable. I love that. I just implicitly love that. And it makes me feel like home every time I'm around my people. And I love, like Michael said, our creativity, our artistry, our talent is hands down to me amazing. It's amazing. And there's so many times that I'm in awe, especially of this younger generation coming up, of the things that they're doing. I don't like it all, but some of the things that the talent we have is just indescribable. It's beautiful. And I think there's things about our culture that are unique and untouchable.
Awesome. Well,
Can I just say one more thing?
Sure.
I think one of the things that's really important, and I just read an article the other day, and it's remarkable from the standpoint that most cultures that have had histories such as we've had in America have dealt with them, like in Germany, and you spent some time in Germany. They took that on as far as the Holocaust, and they gave reparations, they admitted it, and they don't accept any of the history of that. You don't see Adolf Hitler Park or a statue or anything to that. That's a source of shame for that society. They've accepted it and took it head on. So why do we have Confederate flags? Why do we have statues of people that were traitors?
Yep.
And it's incredible. And they took it head on. And look at the cultures that suffer the most, like the United States. Brazil probably took it on partially, probably not fully, and there's still problems there. We have significant problems.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Mike. I think that is huge. That is an argument that I dropped with a friend of mine that we went round and round. And I said, you know what? I won't argue until you tell me how many statues are in Germany. And once you can tell me how many they are, because there's not any, then we can talk. So let's point on. Let's talk about history. Let's really break it down. So I thank you for saying that. I think that is huge.
Now, I think those are really important points, is that it's time to remove those triggers of the hurtful history, and a time to embrace and celebrate each other's differences that we can learn from and just really enrich ourselves with, right? And so I so appreciate all 5 of you for, 1, making the time on a Saturday, 2, being so transparent and willing to share of yourself. And I think it's been wonderful to hear all of your perspectives. I enjoyed our laughs. I enjoyed your frankness. I learned a lot, and I really hope everybody benefited, and I know that they did. And wish you all a wonderful rest of the weekend. Thank you all so much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Haiti. Bye, everyone. It was
Thank
so
you,
nice
Eddie.
to meet you.
Hey, very nice
Pleasure.
meeting you all.
Pleasure. Pleasure.
You guys are in Kansas City, come, I'll take you to barbecue.
There we go. There we go.
Horatio,
Yeah.
I'm coming to your place, man. I'm very sure soon. I'm gonna drag you to get some figure sandwiches.
Yeah, Big Apple in.